Hello and welcome to our webinar on operational and cyber resilience, part 1. My name is Stefan Sulistyo. I'm one of the co-founders of Align, and we will be presenting this today in cooperation with the Institute of Risk Management. Now I will wait still 1 or 2 minutes for a couple more people to connect. Some logistics maybe in the beginning. You can send questions via the BrightTalk tool and feedback. There will be plenty of time in the end of the session, but feel free to send in also questions during the presentation. I will attempt to build that into my presentation while I'm talking. I will also switch back and forth between some slides and a screen share, so also please let me know using the feedback tool in case there's any issues to see or any audio issues. So I'll just give it 1 more minute or so and then I'll start. Okay, just for the feedback that your audio is echoing, I will dial in with another phone then. Okay, I'm back. I hope this is better, and I think then we can also start. So, welcome once again to our webinar on operational and cyber resilience, presented today by Align, the RegTech next generation GRC software, which is basically your mission control for your risks in your organization. My name is Stefan Sulistyo. I'm one of the co-founders of Align. And I will be presenting this talk today, and we are presenting this in cooperation with the Institute of Risk Management. So let me progress through the slides. A couple of words on myself, so you know who you're actually dealing with and who you're listening to here. As I mentioned, I co-founded Align with a number of former colleagues from the consulting space that I previously worked with back in 2015, and I'd be happy to talk a bit about the company later if that's interesting for the participants. Let's say I always worked in this space for a long time. I put on here my ISACA membership level because I just recently noticed that I have this Certified Information Systems Auditor certification since more than 10 years. As a hobby, I also co-founded the so-called International RegTech Association, the IRTA, with RegTech being one of the hype terms and hype topics in the, I guess, in the startup and financial services world, and we actually see ourselves in that area. Besides consulting, before I was also actually leading an information security risk and compliance function at Sky Germany, which is the subsidiary of the Sky in the UK as well, and was basically working on the front lines of this topic. So altogether, I like to say I have almost now 20 years experience on this topic, and this basically led to a lot of pains along the way, as you can imagine, in these kind of topics, and this is basically also what I want to share with you along the way now here when we talk about this operational resilience topic. I got a question here that whether the webinar will be available to watch again in the future. I believe it will be sent around as a recording later as well. That's correct. If you have to drop out early, you can listen to the rest at a later time. So maybe to talk a bit about the general topic. So operational resilience is something that's been coming to the forefront in the topics, I would say, since about last year, 2018 in the summer, when there was this publication from the Bank of England about this topic, and showing, let's say, a new focus of the regulators, and not just in the UK, but also in other countries, on these resilience topics. But maybe let's define this a bit. What this actually means. So operational resilience, maybe just take the word resilience itself, which is basically the ability to react to some kind of adverse situations. There's even the term used in the psychology field, where if a person is resilient, they basically remain calm in emotionally stressful situations. And I think you can apply that somewhat also to organizations, that if there's a change, usually a negative change in the environment that leads to something impacting your normal operations or your normal plans, that you can somehow as an organization deal with this and can still provide your normal services, your normal operations. And now, of course, these topics are not so new. So when we picked 3 topics that we want to show today, as in this first part, we will have some more in the second part that we want to dive into that are usually already familiar to people. So I will start with the topic of business continuity management. So basically the ability to react to any kind of emergency situations, and maybe contrast this a bit that operational resilience in some ways is maybe has a broader scope, because we're not just talking about the let's say emergency situations, but also overall. Still getting somebody saying that it's echoing a lot. So maybe this is my headset. I will try without the headset. I hope this is better and better. Okay, I will just continue unless I get another question on this here. All right, so we will also, besides business continuity management, as one of the topics, and I think this is getting quite key in today's situation, is that everybody has a lot of outsourcing going on. So you have a lot of key parts of your business, of your operations are provided by third-party vendors, and making sure that your controls that you have around resilience also applying in the third-party space is something that you can do via this kind of vendor governance, supplier risk processes, and I will show you also some ways to do that. And part 3 is that how that all ties back into enterprise risk management. And if you take some overall definitions of what does risk management mean, is basically also the planning and the ability to deal with anything that goes not like you planned originally. And this, again, if you remember the topics I mentioned before, is the thing that ties everything together in how you can present also a continuous improvement process around these topics. In part 2, we will also dive specifically into some cyber security areas and how to deal with incidents. and then you will see also how this ties back into this. Okay. Got another feedback that sound was better with headset on, so I will do that. I will go back to it. All right. So I will talk about some general concepts. I will show you some examples how we do that in the Align platform, just to have some practical examples. This should not be like a product presentation or something, but I just wanted to show you actually some real-life examples in our demo environment so you can get a better feel from just the theoretical concepts. So let's continue and start with BCM, Business Continuity Management. That is a classical topic. I think especially also in the financial services world has been always a big topic. But I think with these renewed declarations by different regulators on this resilience topic, I think we can expect also future audits in this space. And considering also sometimes in the news, I think just from a gut feel, it seems like outages and so on have been increasing. So I think this is also one of the reasons why regulators are putting such a focus on it. So what does this deal with? Yeah. We found this little quote here from Donnie Williams, who was a NASA astronaut. So as an astronaut going to space, of course, you don't have a lot of margin for error. If something goes wrong, it can be really catastrophic, so the impact is very high. Usually you should try to prepare. And to prepare for maybe likely scenarios, but maybe also prepare for things that can help you in multiple different scenarios, and practice this. So this is then in the end what makes you resilient, and I want to show you some ways of how you can focus on this, especially if you have a complex organization, because in the end this is where it becomes complicated, right? It's easy if you have to do this on a very small scale, but if you have large company, and or a very complex landscape, then this becomes difficult. So, what are some factors how you can start approaching this? So for sure, the one part is really the tone from the top, right? If the this is, something I guess you get usually in this kind of risk and compliance topic. If there's no leadership commitment to this topic, then you would be hard pressed to bring something forward. But this is really something that needs to be recognized on the top management level, and then a clear responsibility assigned. It's also something that can be observed if you have a diverse organization, and like every business unit does something on their own. That's not always very efficient, and can actually be hindering each other. So that is something I think where it all starts, and the drive from the regulators on this will I think definitely already put this on a top management attention, and that's why also a lot of people are now focusing on this topic. Then number 2, staff engagement and collaboration. In the end, this is like many other risk topics, it is about people and their behavior, and they on an individual level, and then aggregating to a group. So somehow involving not just kind of living in this whole. Often you might have dedicated departments in a larger organization for this BCM topic, and kind of going out of this and involving really the lines of business. This is key to make this really come alive and actually work in a real life event. So that is something also that you want to make sure that it is easy to participate in this. Forward-looking and change-ready, that is again a classic. Especially if you spend a lot of time preparing, like lots of lists, lots of analysis, assessments. You have to. This is not a one-off exercise. Your organization and your environment is constantly changing, so you need to adapt, of course, also your plan. So how can you do that? We're proposing 4 basic steps that you would then apply in a plan, do, check, act cycle, and in a continuous improvement cycle. And after this, I will show you some examples of how you can actually do this. And usually it starts always with a business impact assessment. You want to know where to focus. Where's really in your business? Where are the areas that are really critical? What does that mean, critical? Where it hurts you really the most when it doesn't work. And you want to establish this in a very structured fashion, especially if you have a lot of different business units, a lot of processes, a lot of IT applications and so on. You need to have some kind of repeatable, scalable process to find that out. Basically, you want to do that so you can pick the measures you're doing, the controls, the rules around it, the planning and so on, really focusing on the needs of that particular business area. So something that is very critical, where even a minute of outage hurts you a lot. You would have something. You might have a very different approach compared to something where you can live with something that's not working for a week, and that is something you need to find out, and then you can pick. Normally, you don't have to wait or start on an empty page. There's different frameworks and standards you can use that give you some guidance around how to build such a program, and then it goes basically into execution time. You would do your preparation measures. You would run your training and exercise, and basically feedback that kind of learnings back into your controls and into your framework, and basically set up the process in case there's an actual disaster or the actual event that you want to manage, and then you can basically run through that exercise. So let's actually switch to a demo of some of these topics. I will not dive into everything like in super detail. If anybody's interested to see more of that, please contact us afterwards, and we can give you a full product demo. But just to illustrate the concepts now. And I switch now my screen, and I will show you. Let's start actually with this business impact assessment. And normally, how a lot of people would do that is you would probably ask, you go to the responsible person of that business unit and you ask them some questions, or you, in the first instance, you might want to ask them, how critical are you, or your process, and then you might find out, okay, maybe they don't really know or they have trouble finding that out, and then you might want to guide them with some questions from their context that you can basically find out in a very structured fashion how what kind of criticality level and how important are they actually compared also to all the others in the organization. So let's run through that here, and I'll show you how that can be configured. And that is basically something you could, of course, also do on paper or on in an Excel spreadsheet or so. But then again, if you're talking about hundreds of thousands of these people that you need to interact with, this doesn't scale very well. But let's imagine I am now a business unit responsible person, and I should rate myself. So I could, for example, maybe I'm responsible for client billing. So I pick my service here. I could create a new one. You see some meta information here already that we could pull in maybe from somewhere else. Maybe there's already some database that is not, that you don't have to fill this out again. And now what I get is basically a couple of questions. And this is just some examples. This could be other questions. It could be very specific ones for your own organization that I want to ask this person. That's the responsible person for this area. And now let's provoke here now something very high, and answering the questions in a fashion that you can already tell here from the answers, and that this must be something important. And now I also get a message. Okay, I should do something else. But now let's see what that actually did. I can look at the results, and here I have my client billing that I just did. This is essential, and based on these questions. And this is very easy to change. Let's say you want to adapt this to your own organization. You can, maybe you have different levels, right, of what this is called. Maybe this is not business essential, but you would call this like ultra critical in your organization. You have stuff happening afterwards, so maybe there's an email being sent or something like that. And you can define these questions freely. And we ship a number of these templates that can be used. And you see here, based on, similar like I went through the process, based on what I selected, I will get a score and some outcome. And I could even set this here to some weighted answers. So basically this allows really to have a kind of self-service for people to go in a very lightweight fashion and rate themselves and basically provide the first input into your BCM process. Get a question. The presentation is very light and difficult to see. Unfortunately, I don't know how to change this here. I don't have any setting for this. Apologies. Okay. So what would you do afterwards when you have rated here your different processes based on the outcomes? Let's take a look again here. We have, okay, they're all now rated business essential. So we do a second one that we want to rate in a different way. Just to show you how that looks in a lightweight. So let's say this is not very important. And now I get a result that is rather here non-essential. Yeah. And now I want to, as a reminder, I want to now pick different rules and criteria that I want to apply to this. So I could have some. So now I could have my advanced or my basics, depending on whether that's my low criticality process or my high criticality. Let's imagine I'm taking this one here. And I have now a number of different rules and controls that I can apply to this. And for example, have something like some rule on who has the authority to invoke actually the BCM plan, what is contained in it. Yeah. It's basically just first of all a collection of things that should be implemented by this business area now that they have been rated as business essential, as a kind of reference work as a first step. And now they can start attaching also more evidence here. For example, here you could upload some documents and so on, and have different ways of interacting with this. Let's go back to the slides for a sec. Now basically we went through. I will skip now how the actual disaster management would be. You could also do that in our incident management platform. I think we will come back to this in part 2 of the webinar. But let's imagine now you run this, and of course you want to maybe also measure this across the different business units. But now let's actually kind of do a step forward and actually tie this now to the third-party risk. Because imagine all the business continuity measures you're putting in place. It's not just important that you get assurance internally on this, but also especially all your third-party vendors, because if there's a failure there, this will again also have an impact on basically what your service then basically that could have also an outage, right? So let me go further. The success factors I already mentioned some. So basically having these tailored sets of rules going into based on the criticality level, and then allowing people to interact with this. So let's go actually to the part 2, vendor governance, and see how you could apply this now to something like the BCM topic, but also around third parties. Right? Of course, overall in vendor management, you have all kinds of topic areas you want to address. But I want to focus here actually not on all these topics, but especially around the risk aspect, because this is again for operational resilience. This is something where you want to make sure that your vendors and your third parties also conform to the rules and to the baseline you're setting. And this might then tie back to other topics you have in vendor management, for example, negotiations and contract management, but let's focus on this particular topic. So again, you set rules, like I said, like I did just now on the BCM topic, and you want to assess your vendor similar like you would do for your internal organization, and that basically tie into your risk evaluation. And one topic, we will come back to this conflict check, how you could also do that with similar functionality. So let me show you that, how that could work. So let's say we have something like our set of controls, and again, you could just have a question in Word or in Excel, right? This is how I used to do it. But let's say I want to actually run this here as an assessment. I could create my assessment based on these controls, and these all have questions and answers assigned to it. So I could now send this actually here to my vendors. I have some in here. So imagine this Microsoft. So you could add these in here and send it to them, and it's basically replying in the platform, right? I mean so as I mentioned, I don't want to have this as a product presentation. I just want to show you basically the core concept that you would have to do in such a process. So you want people to actually provide you some information on how they're fulfilling currently these topics, and I can show you an example of something already completed. So, example, here we had some assessment campaigns running before, where I got some answers from my colleague Richard here, and we see here he answered certain topics, and that's actually, since we're at the topic of BCM, let's see what he did here. So I had some target state, and I'm measuring basically, is that fulfilled? Is there any weakness there? For example, here I wanted to have a formal plan owner, but he's saying only executed ad hoc. Yeah? So maybe that's something that's not good in that particular business unit or with that vendor that he's representing. I have to prioritize. This is something that you would now analyze here. If you have a lot of these, you might want to have some other potential analysis on that. And one example, let's see. I mean, some things we have here that you could take a look at. So I could create a report on my BCM assessments. And I did some in the past. If you select both of these. And what I will see here now, actually, I want to deduct basically what is this award? Yeah, where do I need to focus? And basically, what I'm seeing here is that I have actually then critical risk of health and safety, because I have here all kinds of weaknesses. And I probably should tell this person to improve on the situation, because it's not meeting my baseline. And again, I just pulled in now one, actually two reports or two assessments in here. So imagine you could, if you have really hundreds of those, this is where it becomes quite difficult to analyze something like this. Sorry. I didn't read screen it, I just noticed. So just to show you again what I just showed. So I ran the assessment, and that looked like this one here. So basically, you have the question and answers. They tie back to the controls that we had before, right? So you basically, from the baseline, you selected that you want for a business essential vendor, for example. You have certain things that you want them to fulfill, and you're checking in a questionnaire version whether they are doing that. You could, of course, also do an on-site audit, but that doesn't scale if you have large numbers. So you might want to do is basically this here in a digitized format. What you want to have out of this is actually analyze any weaknesses. So for example, here where the measured level is below your target level, you want to see what does that mean and where do I need to focus. And this is what you see basically in this reporting module. And you can here drill down and see what is causing here some risk areas, and maybe you want to put them into a treatment and mitigation plan. Or you have maybe some visual exercises you want to do. You want to maybe see just here based on different topic areas, how is the maturity spread, again, to see where do you need to focus, because in the end it really situation, it all becomes about where do you focus first. And since we're talking also about regulator drive on this, of course, this might be coming from certain areas. For example, if you pick the framework like ISO 22301 for business continuity management, you might also want to align on the requirements of this the source document, and you can see that here also in the mappings that we ship also here. So this is again some topic areas to address. We could dive here much more into how this works on the platform, but I will go back and talk a bit more about the concepts. All right. So around the vendor management topic, what you want to do is you want to also again make it easy for people to provide to you this information, because this is what you want to, what you need to analyze to be able to make sure and to have this assurance that also your third parties are fulfilling the requirements you're setting as part of your operational resilience program. And this is basically one way to do it. And I show you maybe one more example. I'm just going to go back for a second for that vendor conflict check. Similar like the business impact assessment we did before, we can have a similar version of this for vendor conflict check. So in case you have any kind of conflicts of interest, and just to show you how that would look like. So it's basically just different questions, but it's again these kind of classification questions. And this is what we would recommend to do to again make it easy for the involved parties, both the internal departments engaging with vendors, but also the vendors who are not usually risk and compliance or BCM experts to engage with this kind of topic. Okay. So let's come to part 3, how this ties back to enterprise risk management. And hopefully you guys are seeing the updates when I'm switching back and forth. So in the end, what you want to do, if you find any weaknesses, right, as part of your assessments, you need to somehow prioritize those and put those into a mitigation plan. Usually these cost money and take some resources. So you also need to put that into the context of the overall risk level you have and the appetite you have. And this then allows you also to get the budget, for example, for something like this. And coming back also to the base idea, how the operational resilience is about being able to cope with unforeseen circumstances and from any deviations from the normal plan. This is at the core also what risk management does. This is how it ties back together, and also how we would again recommend to build in an operational resilience program into an overall enterprise risk management framework. And how could that be done? So overall, you have a couple of steps that are typical in any kind of ERM program. Where you want to basically create, you want to measure and provide some KPIs. And I showed you one way to do that before with this assessment methodology, where you can find from gaps, you can do some risk analysis based on some. We have some metadata here, but you could of course also do that with just some expert interpretation. You want to compare that to the risk appetite you have overall for your organization or for your business unit. And then basically prioritize any kind of decisions, whether to actually go follow some new opportunities or what kind of mitigation actions you should put in place. And then tie that back into organizational structure. Typically, people talk about this 3 lines of defense model, where you have bring that back, basically any kind of risk ownership and task back to the lines of business, the actual people doing on the front lines. Okay, I get some feedback that the presentation is not updating. Not sure how to restart this actually. Trying back and forth to switch this. Hopefully it keeps updating because I can only end the presentation here, which I don't probably will end the entire webinar. Okay, we'll just try to continue. Okay, so what are some best practices? And again, I can show you again some practical examples of this. Something I think that has been plagued overall in the way that risk management and these other special topics have been approached is that it wasn't very accessible for non-risk experts usually, and that's also something on how it was presented, maybe often in very complex tables, and with a lot of information, and that makes it very daunting. And that also creates a lot of resistance on the part of the first line of defense, the people like in a sales department, a marketing department, HR, whatever, who are not dealing with risk on a day-to-day basis. They have a lot of resistance to this topic, and that also makes it difficult to do something like regular risk assessments because they hate that topic, right? This is something that I think we want to address, right? And one way with this interaction that I just showed you, but just kind of think about this inherent in how you communicate this topic as overall to the people. And this is, I think, something that makes sense, and also to transfer this into a digitized fashion. And of course, then for you as a risk manager, you want to be able to kind of see that in dashboards and get basically, ideally, real-time information. And this you can only get if you have up-to-date data that people provide. This is all where it comes back to. Okay, so just a couple of things of how that ties back together. So I'm switching back to the screen share. Now double checking on that. Yes, it's switched. So where we left off before, we did and I looked at the risks, right? This was the report we created. We got some suggested risks. We have some ways of doing this automatic analysis. We'll go too far now, probably in this webinar, to talk really about how this works, but this is using some algorithm here. But basically, what I want to do now is actually add this to my risk register, and this I can do. I could say this is now relevant, for example, for my EMEA operational risks. And I'll say to do BCM plan in place, and maybe you have some financial loss potential. Just putting in some data so you see the results later. And actually, this will be here. I'm sure you've all seen risk registers in various tools, also in usually, I mean, a lot of people start in a spreadsheet, and this is approaching the same context, but trying to apply some more also usability concepts on this. That was just a question. Okay, the question: How would you link operational resilience MI with existing risk-applied risk reporting? Or does it need to be done as a separate risk scenario report? This is okay. Yeah. So this is actually a very good question. My argument would be to apply the same core concepts as your overall ERM and the same taxonomy, and then have some flexible way of reporting this either in your overall ERM or pull this out just for your report for operational resilience in case you, for example, need to report this to the regulator because they're running an audit. I show you one way what we came up with. Yeah, I'm not saying this is necessarily the what works for everyone, but we thought one way to kind of transform this whole risk register thing is apply some things from social media. For example, the hashtagging, like in Twitter or in Instagram, and this is something that you can do here. This is the risk I just added. You see this here. Yeah, and I added this to one risk tag, which I called EMEA op risk, but I can also do this for something else. For example, I could say maybe this is also part of my GDPR implementation program. Okay, doesn't make sense now in this case, but let's pick another one. Let's pick, maybe it's a board risk, yeah, and I also want to report this in my next risk committee meeting. And maybe I need to prepare this now also for my operational resilience report, and I actually need a new tag. So I can do this here. I can call this op resilience collection for next PI FCA visit. Let's just mention something. I have some metadata here around this. I can set actually risk tolerance. Maybe my risk tolerance here is, let's say £500,000. I can limit the access, and actually now while I'm drafting this, I'm just doing that. I'm going to limit this to myself, so nobody else can see it. But of course, you can easily, again, also model like complex organizations like this. So now I'm just adding this here. Here's my new thing in there yet, because I need to add this this risk I just added as well. Let's just do it here. So let's say, okay, I don't just need it here for all these other topics here. I also need this for my op resilience. And now I can do my little selection filter here on this. And actually, let's imagine I add a couple other ones just so we have a little bit of data there to play around with. Let's say this one also looks like a nice op resilience topic, and actually we'll also add this here. And let's pick a third one. So now I have these in here. And you see, I can kind of slice and dice my reporting now, however I need it for whatever purpose. And now, let's say I put on the head of operational resilience, so I have these. But of course, I can reuse the same risk in another context if that's required. And basically here now, I want to see some of those stats. So you saw some other graphs being built up. This basically comes now from me putting in here certain mitigation actions. So let's say here I said, okay, let's do the BCM plan. Actually, we have some ready-made controls. So BCP should be one here. Let's actually pick this area here, that we want a BC plan. And I will give this a little bit of time. And I'm expecting a certain risk reduction. And I could assign this here to some other person, but let's just save it so you actually see what happens now here. So basically now it starts expecting here some reduction. I have a very high risk exposure here because of this 10 million. Just reduce this here to 1 million. So I have now one dot showing. So actually, let's put in another action. So let's say another mitigation would be maybe actually run an exercise. I also have this in the catalog, but I'm just doing a free text entry now, and this I want to do mid-November. I'm expecting a further reduction in the risk, and this builds up now this graph. You see, this basically contrasts my risk appetite versus my risk exposure. And I set the risk appetite here on my resilience tag, right? On these other tags, I have other risk appetites. So depending on which one I select and which combination, it basically builds up your different graph based on the viewpoint I have. Right? So that answers the question: how can you do kind of both? Yeah, you can have a individual evaluation just for the operational resilience topic, but it also still ties into your overall ERM framework. Okay, we have another question here. How do you go about linking single risks in a business unit, for example, to multiple board level objectives, demonstrating how risk in the first line can affect the achievement of key strategic objectives? You could do that in a similar way, right? You could also create these strategic objectives also as tags. Yeah? So this could be something like strategic objectives. Objective 1. I don't have one in mind. We have also different ways of creating different dimensions here, but let's stay on the standard version. So again, I can just basically say, okay, this is actually addressing my objective here. So this makes it quite flexible on how you create your structure here. And keep in mind that here now I have quite a lot because maybe I'm the risk manager, the global risk manager. I see everything. If you spread this out across the organization, the individual people, if you limit the access, they will only see like particular parts of it, and can only fill up their own part. But you, as the global risk manager, can do this kind of multi-select arithmetic and basically all the graphs fill up in real time. That you have basically an up-to-date view on your current situation, that you can basically be able to decide where do I need to invest some more focus, resources, money, projects also. And that ties back to the way you evaluate this from the risk assessments I showed you before, or also your classification of the inherent criticality and kind of focusing activities. And this is basically applying general concepts. And you will see in part 2, we would do similar things for a cyber resilience part, but just with different topic areas. Okay, so I'll switch back to the last couple of slides, and then we can see what other questions we have. Okay, what are maybe some success factors that we're trying to address here also with this approaches, and why we build the tool in such a way? Is basically collaboration is key here. What, in my view, has always plagued our area of expertise is kind of a little bit of an ivory tower. You have a risk, a BCM team somewhere, and it struggles to get this across the organization. So this should be somehow be able that you can share this across the organization, both the knowledge part and as an easy reference, but also involve people, because you need both their actions but also their information, right? So this is a lot why sometimes we say, okay, risk management should be like social media, right? You're trying to interact with people and collaborating with them, and why some ideas like that come from that. So capitalize on technology. I mean, I showed you some examples of how we do that. There's various other interesting new tools out there that cover different aspects. This is definitely something I would recommend, because Excel, like an Excel spreadsheet, even though it is a software, this is in a sense a manual process. It creates a lot of flexibility when you start, because it's easy to create new fields or some calculations. But where it really struggles, and I lived the pain, I did that myself for many years, is when you have to work with some on your spreadsheet, like if you run for example, your BR, your business impact assessment in spreadsheets, and you have to do this with more than 2-3 people. If you have to do this with 50 people, you are doing nothing. This is something where technology and intelligent tools can kind of take the busy work out of it, so you can just focus on the results. That brings me maybe overall to the questions overall on this topic. Happy to dive into also other areas you want to see. As a reminder, in the second part of the webinar, in the next session, we will dive specifically also into the cyber resilience area, and we will deal with some processes around actually what do you do when an actual event happens, so basically the incident response process. Okay, so I'm getting a question. Would it not be useful to incorporate SMCR requirements within this in line with accounting? Yeah. So SMCR, the senior manager regime and certification regime. I'm sure many people have heard about this also in this audience. So there's a couple of things that have been newly introduced there. Yeah. So on the one hand, also with the previous version of the SMR, you had to basically identify your key roles or accountable people in an organization that have certain key functions, and this has been expanded in the SMCR, and basically the regulators there, and this is a trend we see across the world, yeah, they apply more personal liability to these accountable people. So a lot of focus we're seeing in the marketplace right now is around, first of all, identifying these people. And one way to do that would be kind of this classification module I showed you before. You could have something like that also for identifying senior managers. And maybe I'll just hack something together quickly. SM identifier. And this is maybe then an employee data type. And then the outcome would be I don't know, maybe senior manager, or let's say SMCR relevant, not relevant. And then some questions could be, so you have over 1 million pounds. Just something quick. So I mean, this could be whatever that makes sense, and also taking the list from the FCA and so on. Yes, no, and let's maybe say we just have something like this, and then we could have some more questions to maybe determine this also specifically for your own organization, because this could be different depending on your situation. But then in the end, what it comes down to afterwards, after you have identified these people and they know they have something to do, is the matter of internal control, because they have to make sure that in their area of accountability, things are happening in the proper way. That, for example, if you take the operational resilience topic, that they have done some due care, for example, taking some established industry standard, like I showed you in this controls list, and made sure that in their business units this has been done. Yeah? And this ties back to the other stuff I've shown you. So you would run some assessments in there, and basically you would then assign these topic areas to them, and they would then be able to show assurance that they've actually done these particular topics. Yeah? So I think it wasn't updating before, unfortunately, so I'll just show you the questions I just set up. Yeah. Need to reload. So what I was trying to say here is basically the core concepts are always kind of the same, right? So this is just some process that you can establish then for various purposes, and you could have something like this SMCR check on an employee, and you could have SMCR relevant not relevant. And then you define basically the criteria, I don't know, something like budget over 1 million. Yes, no. And you can set up your heuristic like that. And probably we'll also ship some templates specifically around SMCR here. Okay, so what other questions that come in? Let me just check. How do you link the new resolution and recovery framework with BCM and DR structure? Yeah, so this is something where you can take some of these established frameworks. So we ship a couple that we have currently in the platform, something like ISO 22301, but you can we ship also let's say new ones, or you can add also your own references. So just as an example how that looks like, you have here in the controls, let's go here to the BCM specific ones. You have here references to different standards. So APRA is, for example, in Australia, the Australian financial regulator. They have also similar requirements. And any kind of new frameworks around this can also be added here as a reference why you're doing this. And this ties back to the reporting part later. I skipped this now, but basically this metadata is inherited everywhere. Okay. Some other questions. Relevant indicators, attendance at senior committees such as board RC audit. It was not actually a question, was a comment. Will this webinar be available to replay? Yes, I believe this is normally standard here with the IRM Bright Talk presentations. There should be, after the session, there should be a link being sent around to the recording. Okay, let me see if I missed something here in the questions. No, it seems to be it. So, we can continue a bit if there's still any more questions. Otherwise, I mean, we can also share this presentation deck. There's a couple more slides. So the next part will be Tuesday, September 24th, where we will talk about these other topics as I mentioned. We also have various materials that you can find on this website here, operationalresilience.align.com, where we talk also in a multi-part white paper series about these concepts that I just explained here. So you can also download this there if you want to have this as a little booklet. Yeah. So happy, of course, also in case anybody is interested to have some kind of one-on-one session, just contact us also separately if you set something up. Otherwise, we hope to welcome you also on the next session for this. And I'll leave it open here for a little while in case there are any more questions coming up. Okay, so far I see no further questions. So hopefully this gave you some insights, and we'll just let this run here for a while. But feel free to drop off now, and yeah, see you in the next session.
Okay, it seems no more questions are coming up, so I will now end the session. Thank you very much for your attention and for your participation. Lots of good questions in here, and hope to see you soon on in the next part. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.